Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Fahey. I am a member of the League of Women Voters, and I will be the moderator for this evening's activities. We thank you for being here, and we apologize for the difficulty with parking. As I was explaining to this gentleman on the front row, in 2005, I believe it is, the university celebrated its centennial, and they opened a time capsule, and it contained a copy of the student newspaper. And the lead headline was, "Students Report Lack of Parking." So we're not alone. It's been going on for, 110 years, so what's new? It is the mission of the League of Women Voters to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in our government. It's our duty, it's our responsibility to be part of the government. We encourage members to be informed participants in political activity, but as a nonpartisan organization, we neither oppose nor support any political party or candidate for public office. So this is a nonpartisan activity this evening. We provide nonpartisan information to others with the understanding that they will use it to make their own decisions. We encourage others to register, to vote, and to communicate policy priorities to those in public office. We believe the candidate forums are a highly visible example of our education initiatives and important to the democratic process. To that end, you will find our 2014 Voters Guide on the table at the top of the stairs. And this presents you with all of the positions of those candidates who chose to respond. Not all candidates respond to our inquiries, but it will explain positions and the process of voting, and we want you to keep in mind that besides candidates that we are electing in November, there are also two other big items that will show up on your ballot. And the first one I want to call your attention to is the voting for judges. And to explain a little bit about that, we have Dwayne Falk, who is the president of the Springfield Metropolitan Bar Association, and he will offer a few words to explain that process.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters and the candidates for giving me a couple of minutes to talk to you this evening. Again, my name is Dwayne Falk. I'm president of the Springfield Metropolitan Bar Association, and this audience is the perfect group for the information I'm getting ready to share with you because it is about informed voting. In 2008, Greene County adopted the nonpartisan court plan for selection of our judges. The opponents to it say that in doing so, we lost our right to vote. But that isn't accurate. Arguably, you have a more important vote now, or at least a more informed vote. Let me explain. Before the nonpartisan court plan, we had direct elections of our judges, running in partisan primaries and as Republicans or Democrats in general elections. That works better in smaller communities where everyone knows everyone else, but you really cannot otherwise get much information about the candidates. Arguably also, the temperament we seek in a judge does not always perfectly align with the temperament we seek in a politician. The nonpartisan court plan was adopted in the 1940s for the Missouri Supreme Court and the Courts of Appeals, as well as for its major metropolitan counties. It included the provision in our Missouri Constitution allowing other circuits to adopt the plan as it became the better option for that region. The plan became a model for the nation and is referred to as the Missouri Plan, a form of which has been adopted in most states. Greene County adopted it in 2008. Since then, we have had two elections in which our local judges appeared on ballots with the Missouri Supreme Court and Court of Appeals judges for retention vote. Because we have adopted the plan, our judges go through a rigorous judicial performance evaluation process, the results of which are available to the public, specifically the voters. We have a few brochures with us this evening called Judging the Judges. They're on the table as you exit. But I would direct you to a website called yourmissourijudges.org. That's yourmissourijudges.org, and urge you to familiarize yourself not only with the candidates, but also the process. It is a very well done and easy to understand website. As described in the brochure and on the website, judges on the Missouri Supreme Court, courts of appeals, and locally stand for retention after a certain number of years. The years differ according to the branch of the bench on which they serve. When it is their year to stand for retention, a committee consisting of lawyers and non-lawyers carefully study the results of surveys of the lawyers who have appeared in front of the judges, jurors in the event that the judges hear jury trials, and writing samples submitted by the judge. The committees review the information that is compiled and make a recommendation whether or not to retain the judge. There is a narrative description on the website for each judge standing for retention and also the collated results of the surveys. I'm happy to report that all of our judges on the ballot have been recommended for retention this year. The Missouri Supreme Court judges on the ballot are Laura Stith and Paul Wilson. Court of Appeals judges are Nancy Rawmeyer and Mary Sheffield. Our local judges are David Jones, Jason Brown, Dan Imhoff, and Mark Powell. I'm also proud to convey that the Greene County judges have historically received very favorable recommendations. I appreciate the opportunity to share just a brief overview of the nonpartisan court plan, evaluation, and retention processes with you this evening. Please feel free to contact either myself or Krista Hogan at the Bar Association if you have any further questions or interest in them or suggestions on how we can get the word out. Finally, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters, who have been our value partner from the initial campaign to adopt a nonpartisan court plan in Greene County and continue to be our greatest resource in helping inform voters. Thank you.
I might point out to you that Krista Hogan, who is the director of the Springfield Metropolitan Bar Association, had committed to this speaking engagement, but she went to the Royals game. Can you believe it? I mean, who would do that? Okay, but thank you, Dwayne, for being here. The next person I want to call on is a person from the university. His name is Mike Stout. He is the Missouri State University's Center for Community Engagement director, and he's going to offer us a few words about the importance of this activity.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Probably the most important announcement I have to make is I'm aware of how bad the parking situation was getting on campus. My center will cover the cost of any tickets that you get for parking. If you get a ticket, contact me at mstout@missouristate.edu, or you can go online, find the number for the Center for Community Engagement, give us a call. We made arrangements for parking. Unfortunately, we had a conflict with a homecoming event that was taking place tonight, so I will fix any parking issues that you have. So if you're worried about leaving early because of parking tickets, do not worry about that, all right? Secondly, and more importantly, although probably less financially important to you, is I'm proud to host and co-sponsor this event with the League of Women Voters because the Center for Community Engagement and Missouri State University, through our public affairs mission, have a commitment to ensuring that we create a thriving democratic environment for all citizens who live in the region and across the state to be informed, engaged, and active in terms of their civic life and in terms of being citizens. One of the most important things that we do as a democracy is hold elections to determine who is going to represent us in Congress, City Council, at all different levels of the government. And so we're happy tonight that we have two of the three candidates who will be running for the Missouri 7th Congressional District, and we're very excited to hear what they have to say because elections are about choices. And tonight you'll get to hear some of the different views, some of the different approaches to governance that we may not be currently hearing from our incumbent. We tried to frame the questions in ways that contrast their views to Congressman Long's views since he was unable to attend tonight. And again, this is a nonpartisan event, so we're trying to make sure that we keep this civil. nonpartisan, and informative. This is strictly an informative event for members of the community to be aware of the options that you'll be presented with come November 4th on the ballot. So without further ado, let's get this public forum started. And if you have any questions, please make sure you fill out the index cards, have them sent down to us, and we will try to get to as many of those towards the end as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Now, all together, take out your electric device, turn it to silent. If you don't know how to do that, ask a young person. There are plenty here that can help you with that, so that we have them all silenced. Thank you. Second housekeeping is that there are restrooms available. If you go out this door and into the lobby area, you will find restrooms, and also at the top across the eating area out there, you'll find restrooms there also. Now, I want to remind you that no filming of this in any way is permitted except for our television and radio stations and so forth. They are here to film parts of this and use it in their reports. And also, if any of you have questions, we have a set number of questions that we have created, and we will be asking those questions of our candidates. But if any of you have a question that you would like them to address, you will find, moving through the audience, Ann Elwell, and I think Mike's going to help, and there's perhaps others who have 3x5 cards. There you go. And if you have a question, please write your question on the 3x5 cards, and they will be then forwarded to the front. And we obviously are not going to be able to answer all questions, but they will be, and some of them will be identical questions. It always happens that way. But we will try to answer at least some of the audience inquiries tonight. As you can well see, we have two candidates on the floor with me, running for the Democratic seat is Jim Evans. Jim, wave a little hand. And as a Libertarian, Kevin Craig. Kevin. And as has been alluded to, there is a third candidate, the incumbent, who chose not to join us this evening. And his position is that he does not speak in public forums with other candidates, and that if we want to know his positions, we can look at his voting record. So we will attempt, or have attempted, to put together what might be his response, or his responsive record, I guess I should say, on the questions that we have created. Now, a flip of the coin determined that Mr. Evans, the Democratic candidate, will be offered the opportunity to answer the first question when we get to those. Each candidate will start with the opportunity to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about why they have chosen to stand for election, and they will have 4 minutes to address that particular information. The candidates, I want to call your attention to the two ladies in the first row. Debbie Good has her paddles they are our timekeepers. Ilga Weiss will be running the clock, I believe, and I can assure you that they will wave the flag when you have 1 minute left, and I can further assure you that I will cut you off at the end of your time. As I explained to them earlier, I'm a retired Army nurse, and I raised 3 kids through their teenage years without help, and so I don't take anything off of anybody. Nothing scares me anymore, so I've warned them. Let's see, we start with Mr. Evans, and if you would like, please provide a summary in 4 minutes or less of why you're running to represent the 7th Congressional District, what your legislative priorities would be if elected, and how you compare and contrast to the incumbent.
Thank you. And I want to thank the League of Women Voters and MSU's Center for Community Engagement for putting this forum together. Our nation is founded on unity. Partisan politics is holding us back. I believe there's no limit to what we can accomplish if we'll work together. You know, when the tornado hit Joplin, it did a lot of destruction. And there were people that came into Joplin that had no interest other than taking advantage of the Joplin people after the tornado. There were other people that came in with no interest except standing on the sidelines and looking important. The people that I care about are the ones who went to Joplin and they put on their gloves and they said, how can I help? You know, our country has problems right now. We've been hit by a terrible storm of poor governance and poor economic policy. We need to rebuild this nation, and we need to put on our gloves and ask, how can I help? We need leaders that will walk the walk, not just give lip service to issues. Gandhi said, my life is my message. That's an important idea there, that it's what we do that counts, not what we say. Do you see Congressman Long here tonight? When asked to come out and participate and do something, he chose instead to say, we do not engage. That stubbornness of not wanting to work with others is what causes the gridlock that we have in Washington. Kennedy said, this was back in 1962, we are not rivals for power, but partners for progress and custodians of our American heritage. Congressman Long said, shut her down, when he didn't get his way in Congress. I believe I can be a better congressman. I think I have certain skills that will make me a good congressman. I've lived my whole life, I grew up on a dairy farm. I've lived my whole life on a farm. I know how to walk through a pasture blindfolded and not step in it. I also am a retired teacher. I've worked with students, and I can tell you I know how to make misbehaving students come together and work together, cooperate. I think those are valuable assets. Kennedy reminded us that we should be custodians of our American heritage. Well, I tell you right now, that is very important to me. That's what I want to do. And I will make sure that something like Social Security, that's been here for 80 years, is not auctioned off to Wall Street banks. That Medicare is not auctioned off to insurance companies. And that our control of our local public schools that we are so proud of is not taken away from us. Most of all, I want to rebuild America, rebuild the middle class so that it works for all of us. I would be honored to be your congressman. I promise I'll put on my gloves and I'll ask, how can I help? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. While our timekeepers are resetting the clock, they're ready. Now, Mr. Kevin Craig from the Libertarian Party.
Well, thank you very much for hosting this event and inviting me. Sometimes libertarians get excluded from this kind of event, but I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you all showed up tonight, too. A lot of voters obviously aren't here tonight, and, well, I'm just glad we're here. Maybe it's because one of the major party candidates didn't show up, and so anyway, I'm glad I'm here. I've had the privilege of meeting Jim Evans before tonight, like 2 years ago. This is sort of a rerun of our 2010 campaign. And I'd like to think that he's such a nice guy, he wouldn't make a very good congressman. I know I wouldn't make a very good congressman. My point in running is not to win, because we all know I'm not going to win, unless 100,000 Billy Long voters defect to the Libertarian Party, which isn't likely. But I think I would make a very good messenger. And my message, if you want to send it, is that we need to bind our congressmen down by the chains of the Constitution, as Thomas Jefferson said. I'm a radical libertarian. I'm also a radical Christian, so I'm hoping to bring the religious right social conservatives and the libertarians together to challenge Billy Long's dynasty, as he's seeing it emerge. I'm a founder of a nonprofit 501c3 ministry called Vine and Fig Tree. Now, those words come in a number of places in the Bible. They were George Washington's favorite verses, according to the Library of Congress. It's a vision of beating our swords into plowshares and everyone dwelling securely under his own vine and fig tree. It's the original American dream, owning your own vine and fig tree, free and clear, not a mortgage. And the reason I'm a libertarian is not in spite of being a fanatic Christian, but because I'm a fanatic Christian. My idea of what Jesus said was, do not use the government to impose your will on other people by force. Do not use the sword or torture to try to convince people to become Christians. That's the libertarian message in a nutshell. If you want to join the National Libertarian Party, they ask you to sign a statement that says, I do not believe in the initiation of force as a solution to personal or social problems. That's my campaign in a nutshell. I do not believe in the initiation of force to compel people to do what I think they should do or believe what I think they should be. And so, here's my legislative platform. That was sort of our question, what is your legislative agenda? This is from a National Party platform. I'm quoting, as a first step in reforming government, we support elimination of the departments of commerce, housing and urban development, education and energy, and the elimination, defunding, or privatization of a whole bunch of other of those bureaucracies, including the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, or as I call them, the Federal Department of Pornography. Now, why would they want to abolish all those things? Well, there's two reasons. One of them, they're all the use of force to try to get special interests and their agenda imposed on the rest of us. But also they should abolish them because they're contrary to the Constitution. The Constitution, a central part of the whole theory of the Constitution is it creates a government of enumerated powers. If it's not in the Constitution, the government's not supposed to do it. The government has the idea that it can do anything it wants unless the Constitution says it can't do that. That's the exact opposite of our theory of government. So I would abolish all government agencies that are not enumerated in the Constitution. A good example, the 18th Amendment. People who were teetotalers wanted the government to ban the sale and distribution of alcohol. So they went to Congress and said, just pass a law that says the sale and distribution of alcohol is hereby prohibited. Congress said, we can't do that. There's nothing in the Constitution that says we can ban alcohol. If you want us to pass that little tiny law, you have to amend the entire United States Constitution. So they did. They put the sale of alcohol in the hands of Al Capone and organized crime. It turned out to be a terrible idea. And so they said, let's repeal the 18th Amendment, take that power away from Congress, and that's the 21st Amendment. I believe in taking all the unconstitutional powers away from Congress. That's what I would work for in Congress if you give me your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the first question will have to do with education in the United States. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to the question. In an effort to summarize Representative Long's position, I will read you a summary of some of his information. Education is generally thought of as the solution to a number of pressing social and economic problems. Based on Representative Long's voting record and public statements, he supports vouchers for school choice and believes that the federal government should not be in the business of running schools. Instead, he believes that state-funded vouchers should pay for privately run education at private schools, parochial schools, charter schools, homeschooling, or whatever parents choose. Mr. Evans, what are your views on public education? Do you believe the public school system should be privatized? Why or why not?
Well, you know, I'm the product of public education. I've spent 12 years at Republic R3. I went to right here to MSU, SMSU as it was called, got 2 degrees here at a public school, and I spent my entire career as a teacher in the public school systems. Most of the time I spent in my career, I was at Central High School. And I'm very proud to say that I was at Central High School when we transformed that school by adding the A+ Schools program and the International Baccalaureate program, bringing in the Middlers program, and building a new building to make a high school that was once had an enrollment of 870 people, up to a high school that now has an enrollment of 1,600 people. Central High School in 2012 was voted by U.S. News and World Report as a gold school and one of the best performing schools in the nation. In 2013, it was voted 12th among all the schools in Missouri out of 480 schools. The point that I'm making here is that a public school can be a very good school. As a matter of fact, there is no data to show, no good solid data to show that private schools perform any better than public schools. Most of the highly rated schools in this country are public schools. In closing, I want to say that I would rather have my children and the children of my community being under the rule of a locally elected school board that cares about the children than to be under the rule of the appointed corporate board members that only care about profits.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Craig, what are your views on public education? Do you believe the public school system should be privatized? Why or why not?
Yes, I do. I was a product of public schools, too. My mother taught in public schools for 30 years, and some of them are good, but I think most of them are not that good, and not as good as parents would like them. There are a lot of parents who would like to have prayer and Bible reading in their public schools, but they don't have the choice. There are parents who would like their kids to be taught abstinence outside of marriage. They don't have that choice. And I think that as I read from this party platform, by the way, I just want to mention that this party platform I read from is the Republican Party platform from 1996. They promised they were going to abolish the Department of Education. They never did that. In fact, during the first 6 years of the Bush administration, they doubled the budget for the Department of Education from what it was under Bill Clinton. So if you believe in private schools, if you believe in homeschooling, you shouldn't vote for the Republicans because they don't keep their promises to abide by the Constitution. I think that I'm surprised to hear Jim say that there's no evidence. I've seen a lot of evidence that certainly when I was a kid in public school, our Americans were number one. We were the best in the country, or best in the world. But now our students are like 27th. I can't even name 27 nations that should be better than the United States when it comes to scholastic achievement. But here's the key. I think if you look back in history that the reason we had public schools comes out of the Protestant Reformation. They wanted to teach the Bible to everyone. The first public school law in America is called the Old Deluder Satan Act because it starts out saying that old deluder Satan wanted to keep the Bible out of public schools. The Libertarian Party believes everybody should have choice. The Libertarian Party believes in the separation of school and state. Let parents choose. My first job out of college was as a teacher in a private school. And of course, we had to make ends meet. But the reason we were doing this was not to get rich. It was to help people. We wanted to see education. We wanted kids to be educated. And we see in the public schools that just wasn't happening the way we thought it should happen. Parents should have choice. That's what the Libertarian Party is all about, is choice. And interestingly, it's now against the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Craig.
Thank you.
Our next question has to do with national security. We don't have any direct quotes or information on Mr. Long's position, and so we will ask this question. In terms of foreign policy, what do you think are the major threats to our national security? What do you think is the strongest domestic threat to national security? How would you address these issues if elected? Mr. Evans, Mr. Evans, I'm sorry.
I will speak for Congressman Long.
No. Sorry, my bad.
We cannot prevent disaster. I think that's one of the things that we need to recognize. We cannot have a big military, just a huge military, and expect that to keep us from getting diseases. I think we need to recognize that there are a lot of things that threaten our national security. All we can do is reduce the threat and be prepared to pick up the pieces when we've been hit. An insurance, so to speak. I think there are three main threats that we need to be concerned about. First of all, and probably in my mind not the biggest threat, is terrorism. You know, if ISIS, for instance, if we can confine them to Iraq and confine them to Syria, then they're not much of a threat to our homeland. But if they grow large enough and they get enough strength that they can start using technology to deliver weapons to this country, then they become a threat. So we need to be minimizing that threat ahead of time. There's also environmental threats, all the toxins that we're releasing, the genetically modified organisms that are out there, the bacteria that's resistant to antibiotics, and there's also economic threats. One of the biggest economic threats is transnational corporations that are getting so large that they can actually threaten the sovereignty of countries and destabilize economies. So I see that we have a lot of threats and we need to get in ahead of time.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Craig, in terms of foreign policy, what do you think are the major threats to our national security? What do you think is the strongest domestic threat to national security, and how would you address these issues if elected?
I think the greatest threat to national security, not national security, Missouri security, I'll put it that way. The greatest threat to our security here, those of us who want to live under our own vine and fig tree, is the federal government itself. Osama bin Laden told us why he attacked on 9/11. It's because we had bases in Saudi Arabia on holy ground, we bombed Muslims in Iraq, and we supported the confiscation of Palestinian homes by Israel. That's our government at work. They don't hate us because we're free. They hate our government because our government has tentacles all over the world doing the bidding of oil companies and corporations that we just heard about. Our government overthrew the popularly elected government of Iran back in 1953, put a dictator in its place worse than the guy in the Declaration of Independence, and then we're surprised when they take our diplomats hostage. So we don't like that, so we support Saddam Hussein. When I say we, I keep saying that because I registered as a Republican when I first voted, when I first registered, and I think of my government as somehow being me, but it's not me, it's them, it's the corporations, it's them. And they supported Saddam Hussein in his war with Iran for a year and for 10 years, and 1 million people were dead because of that war. This is why America is no longer the most prosperous and most admired nation in the world as it was 100 years ago, because we're doing the bidding of corporations around the world. We'll impose our will on them by force. That's why the Libertarian Party is not real big on our national security machinery. I'll bring it, if I may, to talk about the education issue.
There's no chance for rebuttal. I'm sorry. That would go back to the first question.
I'm not rebutting myself. I'm just adding to my own remarks.
You only had 2 minutes to do that. I'm sorry. I have to stop you.
Well, anyway, the greatest threat to our national security, the reason why we're threatened by terrorists is because I don't believe vengeance is right, but I understand why they want to take vengeance when we drop a bomb on their wedding and kill their cousin. We should have, instead of spending $1 trillion in Iraq,
Thank you.
give it to them.
Our next question has to do with the economy. Currently, in the 7th Congressional District, nearly 18% of the population lives below the federal poverty line. Nearly 48% of single mother families with children under the age of 18 are living below the poverty line. Low wages are an issue in the district, even when considering the lower cost of living relative to the rest of the country. Mr. Evans, if elected, what would you do to reduce poverty and improve opportunities for better paying jobs in the 7th District?
I wish I had that magic wand, but poverty will always be with us. We know that. But the question is not, do we eliminate poverty, but how do we reduce it to levels that will work in the society? There are people who cannot function on their own. I taught in the highest poverty level schools in Springfield for over 20 years. The students that I had didn't want to be stuck in poverty. And the ones who had the skills and had the emotional makeup to rise out of poverty did, or at least wanted the opportunity to do so. What we need to do as a society is provide opportunity for people in order to get them out. And I think one of the things that we need to really look at is economic development in low-income areas. One of the things that Billy Long voted against was going in and improving the efficiency of low-income housing so that the people there living there would have lower utility bills. That, in the process, they could have also got jobs, helping upgrade and make the homes more efficient, learn skills. This is a way of providing opportunity to help people work themselves out of poverty. We need more programs like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Craig, if elected, what would you do to reduce poverty and improve opportunities for better paying jobs in the 7th District?
Well, just like I believe the greatest threat to our national security is the federal government, I believe the greatest threat to our economy is also the federal government. And I don't believe the federal government has a positive solution for low income or low wages. The real solution to low wages is two things: character and capitalism. Character means you need to have a Protestant work ethic. You need to have respect for your employer. You need to be able to carry out the duties of an employee and, you know, wear your pants above the crack. It's simple, really, to be a good employee. Capital means you're going to get a higher wage paid if somebody has invented a power tool or a truck or has built a factory, because you're more productive when you have a power tool. If you have a tractor or a bulldozer, you're going to get more done than just working with a shovel. And so capital is what helps employees become more productive, and they get higher wages. Our wages really are much higher today than they were 100 years ago. It's not because of minimum wage jobs or anything like that. Minimum wage keeps people who can't produce that much from getting a job at all. And a low-paying job is better than no job at all. When I first after I graduated from college, I worked with single mothers, which is mentioned in our question, and people who are unemployed. I was part of what's called the Catholic Worker Movement. A couple of Christian anarchists and I rented a 12-room house in the bad part of town where homeless was. We opened up our doors to those who wanted to get clean and sober, and we had, for the better part of a decade, an average of 19 homeless people in our home, trying to help them get jobs, help them to get a good resume, get a good wardrobes together so they could pass an interview. Our first guest was a single mother with 3 kids, and I helped set up another organization which is dedicated to single mothers with kids, and combined we have worked about 2,000 different people through our organization, mothers and kids and people who are trying to get homeless, plus children, probably about 2,000 children.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
so
Craig.
this is dear to my heart.
The next question has to do with health care. Representative Long has been very outspoken in his opposition to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Between January 2011 and December 2013, he voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act in whole or in part at least 9 times. Mr. Evans, do you support or oppose the Affordable Care Act, and why?
Yes and no.
Is that multiple choice? Sorry.
Well, the Affordable Care Act has improved access to insurance for many people. It has saved lives. There's no doubt about that. We met a man at Farm Fest this year when we were going out that had a booth at Farm Fest, and he had a stack of applications for insurance for farmers in this area, rural Americans that had not been able to get insurance before the Affordable Care Act came into play. So yes, it is helping people get insurance. And then you have states like Arkansas who chose to expand Medicaid that now have reduced their rate of uninsured tremendously. The Affordable Care Act has also strengthened Medicare. It's eliminated the donut hole, and it's added 13 years to the Medicare Trust Fund. But on the other hand, the Affordable Care Act is causing some corporations to drop benefits for some of their employees. It has done nothing to improve the fact that we are 29th in quality of health care. It has done nothing to bring our costs down when we are the most costly country in the world on health care. And we still have number one cause of personal bankruptcy is health care in this country, health care costs. What we need is for states like Vermont to try out single-payer systems, and if they can work, then we have a direction to go to really improve the health care delivery system in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Craig, do you support or oppose the Affordable Care Act? Why?
I oppose it. Two reasons. One, it's unconstitutional. I would hate to let my first act as a new congressman to raise my hand toward heaven and take an oath to support the Constitution, while in my mind, I'm going to break that oath by doing something the Constitution gives me no authority to do. The second reason is I believe that the whole thing is harmful to our health. If you passed a law that says nobody can charge more than 50 cents for a gallon of gas or a gallon of milk, what are you going to have? You're going to have very long lines at the gas station. The same thing with healthcare. The government can't just make healthcare accessible to everybody. What we need are capitalists to produce healthcare technology. We need competition. And you can't have competition when we don't even know how much we're paying for the item. And that's the biggest problem with the government healthcare, is that nobody knows what they're paying, and the prices are totally uncontrollable. We have a good healthcare system in terms of other countries. For example, if you get prostate cancer in Britain, you're far more likely to die of cancer than you are here, and that's why people from Canada come here, because they want to get healed. And there's a reason why that's true, is because there are lines for a lot of these surgeries in countries where the healthcare is managed by the government. We don't have computer insurance or car insurance in the sense of, I need insurance to pay for a car. I don't need food insurance because prices of food are so high I can't afford to buy food without insurance. Healthcare should be just like computers and cars and everything else. There's nothing magic or demonic about healthcare that we need the government, especially the federal government, to help us get healthcare. It's just a commodity. It's just a goods and services, just like anything else in our economy. In a free economy, you'll have the best healthcare at the lowest price. And I think the last 200 years under capitalism, and comparing that with socialism in the last 100 years, vindicates the claim that capitalism works better than socialism. Thanks for listening.
All right. Our next question has to do with certain social issues. As you know, the issue of sexual assault in the military and on college campuses has received a lot of media attention recently. In February 2013, Representative Long voted no on reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act that was passed in 1994 and meant to provide resources to improve the criminal justice response to violence against women and ensuring victims of sexual assault and their families have access to services and safety needed to rebuild their lives. Now, Mr. Evans, what would you vote to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act if elected? Why or why not?
Yes, I would vote to reauthorize it. As I mentioned earlier, we can't prevent bad things from happening, but we can insure people and communities so that we can recover and we can help people recover their lives when bad things happen. And I think this is a case where we as a people are thinking, we can't maybe prevent it from happening. Maybe we can reduce the incidents, but we can also help people recover, and I think that's what this act is for. But I do want to also mention, I'd like to forgive Congressman Long on this vote, because I believe he was put between a rock and a hard place. I actually think he would support the Violence Against Women Act. But in that particular situation, a ban on assault weapons had been added to the bill. And Congressman Long couldn't, in Southwest Missouri, vote to ban assault weapons. That would have been catastrophic to him, again, with his constituents. So in this particular case, I would say that I don't know for sure, but I really feel like he might well support the Violence Against Women Act.
Thank you. Mr. Craig, would you vote to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act if elected? Why or why not?
I wouldn't, and it's the same mantra again. It's not within the enumerated powers of the federal government to deal with domestic violence. Problems should be dealt as locally as they possibly can and as voluntarily without tax support, confiscation of wealth, and so forth. As I said, I spent the better part of 10 years working with single mothers, sometimes victims of domestic abuse, and it's a tragedy. I'm embarrassed to be a man sometimes because there are so many jerks out there who are alcoholic and abusive, and it's not good. But looking to the federal government, the same government that wipes out millions of people around the world to solve the problem of violence, I don't think that's the way to go. We need local solutions. We need to know when, and this is my main objection to the Violence Against Women Act, from what I've read from women who oppose the act, is that sometimes it tends to be a vehicle for a radical feminist agenda that's anti-male, anti-husband, anti-father, and it gives a woman who has regrets the morning after to go after a man with vengeance. He loses his constitutional rights across the board, loses contact with children, even if there's no evidence that he's guilty of any abuse. So it's a bad law. It's a bad principle. It's something that you could use as a sword rather than as a shield. We need people who are closer to the facts, who can make a better judgment of the situation and offer counseling and other support. I'd like to encourage people to do that kind of a thing, to offer support, tangible support. The word compassion doesn't mean levy a tax on people you don't like to pay for your special interests. It comes from two Latin words which means suffer with. When somebody's a victim of abuse, just give them a check, or a lawyer is not the best way to do it all the time. Now, you can be legal support, and I passed the bar in California when I lived there, and so I'm a big fan of the legal system when it's appropriate. But I think better off is a situation of personal approach to the situation, local, rather than a federal approach.
The second part of this question has to do with women's health and family planning issues. And those issues generate a lot of emotion and are commonly used as divisive issues during election cycles. Long has co-sponsored legislation including the Pro-Life Act, prohibiting abortion information at school health centers, the Sanctity of Human Life Act, that states that life and human rights begin at fertilization or cloning, and Title X Abortion Provider Prohibition Act, that prohibits providing any federal family planning assistance to an entity if they perform abortions. Mr. Evans, what actions need to be taken in order to increase access to family planning and women's health care services in the 7th District?
You know, there was a recent study that found that if women had access at a very low cost, possibly even free, to long-lasting contraceptives, that it could actually result in the reduction of the abortion rate of 50%. And the other way, another side of that is the cost of contraception. If we're talking about, I'm a conservative. I believe that we want to do things and get the best value we can. And the cost of contraception is both economically and emotionally much less than the cost of unintended pregnancies. So if as a society, we can make a decision like that, which will actually save us money and address a very contentious issue of the abortion rate, if we can lower the abortion rate and save money and save people's lives, then I can't imagine why we would do otherwise. So that's the approach I would take.
Thank you. May I remind you, please not to interrupt with your applause. Even if you support the candidate, you're eating into his time, and so please hold your applause until he has finished his statements. Mr. Craig, what actions need to be taken in order to increase access to family planning and women's health care services?
Well, I don't think any from the federal government at all. It's confusing why we should be concerned about lowering the abortion rate if abortion is just like taking out a tumor. unless it's a real human being, there shouldn't be anything to worry about. I think it is a human being. And so I think that it's important that we reduce the abortion rate for that reason. Billy Long talks about sanctity of life, and it's easy to vote for a bill like the Sanctity of Life bill because it doesn't really accomplish anything, it's just words. He recently voted for a continuing resolution that gives money to Planned Parenthood. So he talks, but he doesn't always walk the talk. Lost my train of thought there. But the key is, I think, that I'm really blanking out here. Like I said, I'm concerned about women who are at their wits' edge on this thing. We had women in our home who were facing these issues, but I guess my thought is here that we need to take seriously some moral issues that revolve around on this issue, because we got a big problem in not realizing the importance of marriage and the importance of not having sex until you're married, and that's where a lot of these problems come up. And so these are things that were once talked about in schools, but they're not anymore. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Let's turn our attention to inequality. Women's health and family planning issues generate lots of emotion. I'm sorry, I've already talked to that one. This is from Mr. Long. As you may be aware, levels of economic inequality have been rapidly increasing and are now at the highest level since 1928, the year before the Great Depression. The top 1% of families now control nearly 40% of the nation's wealth, while the bottom 90% control 25.6% of the nation's wealth. Mr. Evans, do you see increasing income and wealth gaps in the U.S. as a problem? If you do see them as a problem, what would you do to address the issue if elected?
Can I have 30 minutes on this?
Good try.
You know, we hear the idea that the rising tide lifts all boats. I've got a mental picture here of a luxury, I don't know if I can actually say this, a luxury yacht in a lock, and there's a lake nearby, and the person decides that he wants to raise his luxury yacht, so he pumps water out of the lake into this lock. And what happens? The level of the lake goes down, and pretty soon you've got a bunch of people out here with their boats marooned in the mud in order to lift this yacht. And I think that's a lot of what's going on in this country. You know, in the last 6 years, median family income in Missouri has dropped 6.4%, while corporate income has gone up 178%. Inequality in this country is the highest it has been since 1929. What does that tell you? It tells you that we've got a problem that we need to address. I will tell you that I've researched this topic considerably. That's why I said I need 30 minutes on it. There are two issues that need to be addressed to fix it. One is trade policy. We have bad trade policy that's causing us to outsource jobs. We also have a situation where we are capitalizing labor, replacing people with robots, if you will. And when a robot takes someone's job, that robot doesn't pay taxes. That robot doesn't pay into health care. That robot doesn't pay into any kind of retirement program. And so what is happening is we've got corporations that are exploiting that to create this race to the bottom that's causing a large percentage. I knew I need 30 minutes.
Good try. Mr. Craig, do you see increasing income and wealth gaps in the U.S. as a problem? If you do see them as a problem, what would you do to address the issue if elected?
I don't see it as a problem. 500 years ago, we were all equal. There was no income inequality. We were all poor, except for the kings. Today, the poorest people are richer than the kings 500 years ago, and that's because of capitalism, not socialism. It's because of free market, and I'm glad that I'm not all that rich. In fact, I think my entire life I've lived below the federal poverty level because my work with the poor and the homeless was complete on a voluntary basis. So I'm not rich, but I'm happy for rich people because the only way they can become rich in a free economy is by producing goods and services which people say, that's really good, that helps me raise my standard of living. I'm game, let's go. And they have a transaction and he makes a profit and they raise their standard of living. That's how we did that. That's why we all enjoy in tremendous wealth, all things considered. We're just, all of us, exorbitantly wealthy compared to people 100, 200, 500 years ago. The problem is, how do these really rich people get rich? Could they get rich without the government, the federal government, the state? I don't think so, a lot of them anyway, because a lot of them, for example, the Bush bailouts in 2008, that was $3,000 for every man, woman, and child in America going to Wall Street. That's totally unlibertarian, that's totally unconstitutional, it's totally unethical. And a lot of the rich benefit from federal subsidies, agriculture subsidies, all kinds of subsidies. Corporate welfare is one thing, the Libertarian Party, we're against that. And so I think it's bad, envy. Envy is a bad thing. And for us to just resent the rich, that's not productive. I think we should congratulate the rich when they do provide a genuine service in which people voluntarily engage in a transaction and enjoy our wealth. I would rather be the lowest, poorest person in a world of Star Trek. You know, high technology, and let everybody be more wealthy than I am, because I still enjoy a great deal of wealth. And I'm the beneficiary, even though I'm not directly, but
Thank
I
you.
appreciate the wealth.
Our next question has to do with the environment. Representative Long sponsored the Superfund Common Sense Act that amends the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, you got that, of 1980, to exclude manure from the definition of hazardous substance and pollutant or contaminant for purposes of such act. Mr. Evans, would you have voted on this amendment? Why or why not?
I can't leave that one alone. I mean, that question stinks. And actually, the reason it stinks is because it has ammonia in it. And ammonia has good properties and bad properties. First of all, it is a plant nutrient. And if ammonia is handled, and if the manure is handled properly, and it's returned to the soil, it enables the crops to grow better and produce more food. So yes, manure can be a good thing. But ammonia also has some bad qualities. If it gets into the streams, the rivers, the lakes, or the ocean, it kills the life in those streams, rivers, and oceans, because it takes oxygen out of the water. And we have, right now, hundreds of square miles in the Gulf of Mexico where we call it the dead zone, where ammonia fertilizers have run into the Gulf of Mexico and killed, huge amounts of wildlife in those areas and destroyed the fishing industry in those areas. So manure, if handled properly, is an asset. It is something that we can use and it's beneficial. But it contains toxins, it contains E. coli, it contains ammonia, and if it is handled improperly and the concentrations grow too large or it's not used properly, then it can become a very deadly pollutant, very harmful to the environment and very harmful to people. So long is wrong. We do need to have regulations here.
Thank you. Mr. Craig, would you have voted on this amendment about manure? Why or why not?
I would have voted against it. Again, just like alcohol, it's not the federal government's business to regulate manure. In a world of vine and fig tree, where everyone dwells securely under his own vine and fig tree, manure is not a big problem. It's natural, as Jim was saying. But this isn't the real world. This is the world of government. And what that means is when the EPA passes a regulation, powerful special interests can manipulate the process and close down a bunch of family farms and then buy it out, and it becomes the property of a big mega agribiz concentrate, where that's when manure becomes a problem, when it's all concentrated in one place. That's the way government works. Government prefers to have one big corporation to regulate rather than try to regulate lots of little family farms. And there's this inertia in government, which we've seen over the last decades, is that they will close down the little guy for the benefit of the big guy. And that's when you have a pollution problem. But of course, the big guy has all kinds of lawyers, and he can get around all the regulations, and it really is nothing. It's a lot of show. But it's more government power, more regulation, and more centralization. When you ask the federal government to solve a problem, it's always inevitable that the problem will not be solved. It'll be compounded. Things will get worse. More centralized power, more bigger corporations, less of the vine and fig tree worldview. So I'm totally against government intervention. We had a problem in the 1800s where people, for example, a train would set on fire someone's field. And the farmer would go to the courts and say, hey, this train set my field on fire. He needs to make restitution. But the court would say, oh, no, we want America to become an economic titan. And so we need to get behind industry. And you just have to sacrifice your farm to the interests of America's economic growth. We need courts on a local level who will look at the pollution problem and make good decisions based on sound principles. But we're not going to get that from a regulator 3,000 miles away. The libertarian principle is local
Thank you, Mr. Craig.
government.
I want to pause for just a moment. I can't resist this. There's a story about Harry Truman, and there was an issue that came up about the use of manure as a byproduct, obviously, of cattle. And someone asked his wife, Bess, if she couldn't get him to say fertilizer instead of manure. And she said, do you know how long it took me to get him to say manure? Another question on environmental issues. Approximately 97% of climate scientists agree that global warming is happening and that humans have contributed, at least in part, to climate change. Do you believe that the scientific evidence supporting global warming is accurate, or do you believe it is a hoax? Go ahead, Mr. Evans.
You know, actually, I have sat in Congressman Long's office and had this discussion with him. This is not new to me. A friend of mine from here at MSU went with me. We had this discussion. I will say that I started out as a physics major in college. I have a fairly good science background. I have an excellent math background with an MA in math. I believe that I am better qualified than Congressman Long to evaluate whether or not climate change is real. But I will also say that it's irrelevant because neither one of us has the qualifications to understand the science, the math, and the complex computer models that go into making these predictions about what will happen to the climate with rising CO2 levels. I think the important thing is not for me to debate Congressman Long or anyone else about whether or not climate change is real. The important thing is to look at sourcing. Where do we get our information? And I can tell you that NASA, the Department of Defense, the Department of Agriculture, the National Property and Casualty Insurers of America, and thousands of peer-reviewed scientists say this is a serious issue and we need to pay attention to it. So I say we need to take the threat seriously because I believe that that group of people knows more about what they're talking about than I do. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Craig, do you believe that the scientific evidence supporting global warming is accurate, or do you believe it's a hoax?
I wouldn't say it's all a hoax, although we do have the problem with the email they had when they were deliberately covering up some of the evidence. But I agree that no congressman is going to have the wherewithal to sort this all out. So I think the easiest way to sort it out, instead of debating who is a real climatologist, I mean, recently the Wall Street Journal, a couple of weeks ago I think, had an article saying that the 97% figure is bogus, that there are in fact a whole lot of climatologists who don't believe that global warming is a threat. But here's his secret, I think. When you get a bill on your desk as a congressman or a legislature, just ask yourself, what are the costs and what are the benefits? And the cost, if we if we cut our energy use significantly, the cost is going to be jobs, the cost is going to be our standard of living. If the world cuts its energy use, then there's going to be countries in the underdeveloped world where they're going to have people who are going to be dying. Hundreds of millions of people might die under some of the more radical proposals. But what is the benefit? And that's the question I've never been able to figure out. What is the benefit? If we have this proposal which cuts all the use of our CO2 and so forth, what is the benefit? And they never have a really good answer. Some of them say, well, we think we might be able to get a 2 or 3, let's see what I mean, a 2/10 or a 3/10 of 1 degree reduction in global warming. Well, why is that significant? What is the real problem with global warming? I thought the greenhouse effect was a good thing. Plants love CO2. It could be the end of human starvation and malnutrition because there would be abundant produce again. But I never get a clear answer on what the real problem with the greenhouse effect is. We had global warming hundreds of years ago. They grew wheat and grapes in Greenland. I don't see the problem with that. The big problem, I think, is that some of the liberals living on Malibu will lose their beach houses if the sea level goes up. And I don't know that that's a big problem. I think the reduction in our standard of living and perhaps deaths of millions of people in less developed areas is a reason to vote no if we can't get something more concrete as to what the real benefit. The cost is too great
Thank
a
you,
cost.
Mr. Craig. One more question on the environmental issue. According to a statement on Representative Long's website, he supports researching clean coal, offshore drilling, and drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to produce more energy domestically and to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. According to his statements, he opposes a tax on carbon and has signed a pledge to not support such a tax. He also voted to repeal weatherization assistance for low-income persons and opposes EPA regulations of greenhouse gases. Mr. Evans, should the U.S. be limiting federal regulations of air pollutants and investing more resources in fossil fuel extraction? Or should we be focusing more on regulation of pollutants and investing in sustainable sources of energy such as wind, solar, and hydroelectricity?
I think it's interesting that Congressman Long seems to be against conservation, and he also seems to be against technology, trying to advance our use of new energy sources. I would go back to what Kennedy said, that we all need to be custodians of our national heritage. You know, it's important that we have pure water and clean air and safe, abundant food. That's good stewardship. We need to make sure that we're there. We need to stretch. This is something I never hear people talk about. We need to stretch our natural resources as far into the future as we can. We don't need to be burning all of our oil and burning all of our coal and burning all of our natural gas in the next 5, 10, 50 years. We want to be able to stretch it out so that our children and our grandchildren will be able to benefit from those precious natural resources. One of the ways we can do that is by developing clean, sustainable energy sources. You know, my home is powered by solar energy. It works right here in Southwest Missouri. Why aren't we developing 7th District natural energy resources instead of importing our energy resources from someplace else? It makes no sense. And I don't know why someone who calls themselves a conservative, someone who calls themselves a steward, would be taking that kind of approach. Thank you.
Mr. Craig, should the U.S. be limiting federal regulations of air pollutants and investing more resources in fossil fuel extraction, or should we be focusing more on regulation of pollutants and investing in sustainable sources of energy such as wind, solar, and hydroelectricity?
Well, I would again be violating my oath to support the Constitution if I tried to get the federal government to invest in regulating pollutants or investing in any kind of form of energy. We, the people, did not give the federal government that authority in the Constitution. But I think it's a bad suggestion just looking at it. The most bankrupt entity on the planet, the federal government as our investment advisor, I think that's crazy. What would the federal government know how to invest in? If we look at the progress of our technology in the last 100 years, it wasn't because it was directed by the federal government, it was because it was directed by profit. And people were saying, I think this is going to be something that's going to benefit other people, and I can make some money by developing this technology. I think it's a really bad idea for our children to be sentenced to living more under petroleum. Petroleum is the whale oil of today. We need to be moving on to something else. I'm a big fan of Nikola Tesla, who invented alternating current. When all the scientists in the world said alternating current violates the laws of physics, but this is all alternating current in here, and we'd be miserable if we had to live under battery power. So I trust investors, I trust capitalists to invest in the best kind of energy. And if we don't have subsidies from the federal government, I think we'll do better. Petroleum is completely subsidized by the federal government. And when we ask for more petroleum, we're really asking for some more Muslims in the Middle East to be nuked. I mean, that's a bad deal. There are other forms of energy. If you get a compass out, you'll see the needle move because there's energy all around the planet. And that kind of energy, and I think there's an inventor who's actually figured out how to use the energy that turns the needle on your compass to turn the wheels on his car. The future is unlimited, and it shouldn't be limited by petroleum and by the nexus between the federal government and the petroleum companies. And we don't want the federal government deciding what our next energy source is going to be. I think our children look forward to something amazing in the 22nd century that we can't even dream of right now, but the technology and the innovation and the creativity is suppressed because they are unable to get investors because their money is taken from the federal government.
Now, the next 3 questions come from you, the audience. And so you have not seen these questions, and they have been submitted by the people in the audience and screened by League of Women Voters and also our MSU community. The first question: in Missouri, I meet many who don't vote. Why should they, when legislators always say they are there for the people and they end up getting fat on lobbyists? No pun intended. What will you do to keep these lobbyists at a distance? Mr. Evans.
Yeah, I think lobbyists are one of the most dangerous things in Congress. We have term limits in the state, but the lobbyists don't have term limits. The tremendous amount of money that's going into our election process is really corrupting our system. And if I were up there, I think I'd just put a sign on my door that said, if you live in Southwest Missouri, if you're one of my constituents, come on in. But if you don't belong in our state, in my district, just stay out of my door. Because one of the worst things that we have are these transnational companies that I talked about earlier, spending tons of money to get Congress people elected and then sending their lobbyists in to tell them how to vote on issues. So I think one of the first things that we need to do, and I would even consider and would work toward an amendment to the Constitution that would say, first of all, money is not speech, and corporations are not people. I think that might be one way that we could transform the system. It also bothers me that in politics, and I think this is one of the reasons people just get turned off of it, it bothers me that we have no kind of truth in advertising in politics. A politician with a lot of money can tell any lie he wants. Congressman Long's got enough money right now that a week before this election, he could flood TV and radio in this area with any kind of lie he wanted to about me or Kevin Craig, and we wouldn't be able to do anything about it. And I think that's a corruption of the system, and it's a disservice to democracy. Thank you.
Mr. Craig, how would you keep lobbyists at bay?
Well, I'm cut from the same cloth as Congressman Ron Paul, and the lobbyists didn't even show up at his door because they knew they couldn't get anything from him because he doesn't use the federal government to benefit special interests. The principle here is use persuasion, use eloquence, use reason, use facts to get other people to support your agenda. And that's great, and that's what America is about. But what people do is when they can't persuade people to give them their money for their project, they go to government. The government takes money from people by force, or it takes money from people by fraud, which is to say by inflation, by printing the money up out of nowhere and reducing the value of everybody else's dollar and taking purchasing power away from those who are trying to save their dollars. And that's what lobbyists know. And unfortunately, Jim Evans has shown that he's willing to use the federal government to advance certain interests. So all the other lobbyists are going to say, well, he's approachable. Maybe he'll subsidize our special interests too. As a libertarian, I don't subsidize anybody's special interest. I think you got to use persuasion, got to use facts. This is the age of the internet. This is the age of crowdfunding. Get your money from people voluntarily. Persuade them, encourage them, educate them, enlighten them, inspire them. And that's how you can get your projects funded. We can fund the biggest projects in the world. I mean, even global warming, if you can persuade people that that's a genuine danger, that that's not a good thing. But the federal government is an instrument of coercion, it's an instrument of violence, it's an instrument of plunder around the world. And to ask the federal government to take money from other people, and that's what the lobbyists are doing. They say, I can't persuade my client base to do what I want them to do. I want you to take the money from other people by force or fraud and give it to me. And I'll give you something for your campaign. The whole thing is corrupt, it's bribery, it's unethical. The whole system ought to be abolished, and that's why libertarians come off as being anti-government, but it's because we're anti-coercion. We do not believe in the initiation of force to solve any social or personal problem. And that's why libertarians, that's why they never show up at our door, the lobbyists. They know they get nowhere.
Thank you. The next question on mental health. How do you view society's responsibility for the mentally ill? Here and nationwide, jails have become by default our biggest mental health providers. How would you work to find a better solution? Mr. Evans?
This is one area I probably will end up agreeing with Kevin Craig, that I don't see that the federal government has much that they can do in that area. It becomes more of a community issue and possibly even a state issue. I think with our healthcare system, we have kicked people out of mental health treatments and facilities. Maybe we need to have part of our insuring process to be able to provide insurance for people who can't function because of their mental conditions. And in that sense, I think that's about the best we could do in this case.
Thank you. And Mr. Craig?
You can help me on that one.
Well, if we're going to use jails to help the mentally ill, I think the first thing we should do is make some more space for them by legalizing drugs like marijuana and getting non-violent offenders out of prison, millions of them just about, and that will make things a little bit easier. But of course, I don't think jail is a good place for mentally ill. I think a lot of this has to do with ethics and morality and your worldview, religion, and a sense of hope. I think a lot of people become what the state calls mentally ill because they're frustrated at a violent and meaningless world, it seems at sometimes. We don't have what the Declaration of Independence speaks of as a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. We don't have what the Constitution says is our goal, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We don't have that vision of the vine and fig tree world where we're all dwelling securely and in touch in a practical way with nature. And so people just, I go nuts sometimes. This is a crazy world. It's a violent world. And so I think a lot of healing comes from getting in touch with these spiritual roots. It's healthier that way. We've got an increased number of kids in school who are being prescribed prescription drugs, ostensibly because they're almost mentally ill. They've got mental illness problems and so forth. That's a recent phenomenon. And a lot of this is, I think, beyond science. I think a lot of this, again, is pharmaceutical corporations taking control. Libertarians have a strong background in mental illness because so many people are that's the Soviet Union. When you're a dissenter against the system, they call you mentally ill, and then they put you in Siberia, in the concentration camp. And our mental illness system is very much like that. If you don't conform to the mainstream, they view you as mentally ill. There are people who are violent, and there's ways to deal with that kind of violence. But again, the libertarian says, bring this all down to the local level. Bring this down so that you know the circumstances and can make an informed judgment instead of passing a law from on high on the federal government thousands of miles away.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Our next question has to do with higher education funding.
If she'll allow it.
What is your position on the funding of higher education for the state of Missouri? Mr. Evans.
Is it okay if Kevin takes this one first?
It's okay with me.
All right.
All right. Again, we talked about education, that's outside the scope of the Constitution. We're seeing colleges, I think, and with all due respect, and I'm glad we're here and that we have this forum, but I don't know that necessarily needs to be a government-funded building. But I was reading just recently about the founder of this organization, a business called Theranos, I think it's called. Raise your hand if you've heard of Theranos. Anybody out there? Well, there's this young lady who dropped out of Stanford, and she's got a completely new way of doing blood tests, and it's going to revolutionize the healthcare industry. She's just very young, and she's already worth $9 billion. And she's a dropout. Bill Gates dropped out. I mean, a lot of people are dropping out. And I think dropping out and pursuing a calling where you can benefit the human race in a practical way is much better than having the federal government give you student loans, which then raises the price of tuition for everybody else. And the whole student loan picture is a disaster. It's now more student debt than credit cards. And where do you go? How many people actually get to work in the field in which they majored? Very few, really. I think much more practical is like on-the-job training. There are a lot of people who go to college who have no business. They don't need to be going to college and racking up student debts. They can start working in a trade and start working their way up in a field where they're making a real contribution, really a vital contribution. So I'm against government funding of education on all levels. But that's because I'm in favor of educated people, and I'm in favor of people who are productive. So there's your answer.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, would you like to answer that?
Yes. I went here to SMSU back in late 1960s, and I was able to actually work my way through college on a minimum wage job. I shared a room with a roommate, and we were able to work minimum wage jobs and pay our tuition and our living with no help from our parents and no help from the government, and to work our way through school. Tuition here at SMSU in 1968, 1969, 1970 was $90 for a full semester. $90. I could take 18 hours. That's $5 a credit hour. I don't know what it is today, what, $450 a credit hour? Students today cannot work their way through school like that. What has happened? The state of Missouri has a larger budget today than it did back then. And yet, we have put our universities in a situation where the cost of education is essentially unaffordable. I'm thinking when you graduate from high school, your ACT score should be more important than your credit score. We need to be able to do something about that. Oh, one other thing. Got a little time left? I'm a veteran. I finished my college education on the GI Bill. And I wanted to point out that the GI Bill has proven, it's a government investment, but it's actually proven to return more money to the government in revenue than it cost. If you think education is expensive, try the cost of ignorance. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question from our audience. Do you support Common Core? If so, why? If not, why not? Mr. Craig, do you want to go first again, or are we going to go back?
You want to go first?
Go ahead.
All right. Again, education is outside the federal government's constitutional authority. I've heard good things and bad things from Common Core, but I don't like the idea of the federal government mandating a standard for everybody. I think the schools should be locally determined. The parents should have more authority. Parents, I think, should be able to choose whether to go to a public school or not. And the problem with it's not the Common Core of the problem, it's the whole problem of government-funded schooling. I think that I like the idea. I think we mentioned this earlier on profit-motivated schools. I like the idea of businesses setting up schools, and so they can raise up people who will know how to fit into their business and be more productive. And there are lots of opportunities, lots of options for education besides the typical one-size-fits-all public school. If parents had choice in a free market of education, some of them I've talked to a woman recently, in fact, well, anyway, her daughter loves the Common Core stuff. But there's a lot of people who really don't like the Common Core material. It's confusing and whatever the problem is. But let parents choose. Let the money follow the student so that the parent and the student can decide, well, we want this online course. We want this local school here. We want another option here for athletics or something like that. It's like groceries. Food is more important than education for children. But we don't require children to go to a federal nutrition center to be fed their meals. We trust parents to feed their kids. We can trust parents to educate their kids. Some might choose Common Core, some might choose any other option. But when we have competition, educators, teachers who want to get outside the bureaucracy of the government system will say, I know how to educate kids. I want the freedom to do so. I want to set up my own school, and I will compete against all the other schools because I think I can do a better job. I think parents will like what I can do, and I can be proud of the way I've got these kids set off to the road to adulthood. So Common Core, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Separation of school and state is what the Libertarian Party stands for.
Thank you. Mr. Evans?
You know, you can take out your cell phone and you can download an app that will let you view all of the Common Core curriculum guidelines. I'm a retired teacher, as I said. When I stood in front of a class and I taught what the students needed to learn. I didn't pay attention. I shouldn't say I didn't pay attention. I paid attention to the curriculum guidelines that we have. But every day when you walk into a classroom as a teacher, you have to feel out where the students are and what you need to do to move them forward. And with Common Core, I've downloaded that app, by the way, and I have looked at a lot of the curriculum items in there, and they're not that bad. The big question is, are we dictating what teachers have to teach? Are we dictating what level students have to reach at a certain time? Or are we just presenting guidelines to help keep some consistency throughout the country so that as students move from one school to another, from one place to another, there is some level of consistency, that they know what when they go into a new school, they're not totally lost because that school's teaching something different at a total different pace. And it enables the instructors then to help keep things together. But when it comes to national imposition on local schools as to what they have to teach and what methods they have to use, I'm opposed to that also. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Here's the question.
I thought we had 3.
I got a few more in here. If elected, would you support the Federal Employment Non-Discrimination Act to protect LGBT Americans from discrimination in the workplace? Mr. Evans.
You know, the purpose of government is to protect our rights, not to take them away from us, but to protect our rights. And sometimes it's important that the government protect my rights from someone else. And sometimes we do have to have a law that goes back to the very first clause in the preamble, which says, establish justice. To me, that means treat all people equally under the law. And if we have a group of people, whether they're blacks or Hispanics or LGBT, that are not being treated equally by their fellow man, then the government has a responsibility to step in and say, we must treat this group of people fairly and equally, and we must have laws that do that across the board. So the non-discrimination law, yes, I would support.
Thank you. Mr. Craig.
Well, I wouldn't support it for the same reasons I keep saying. It's not within the authority of the Constitution. I'd be lying if I took an oath to support the Constitution and then voted for that law. So let me get a bigger picture here. My perspective. We had a case, I think in the 1980s, coming out of Georgia, Police broke into a house to bust a couple of guys for drugs, and they found them committing sodomy. So they charged them under the Georgia sodomy law. The Supreme Court of the United States upheld the law, which to me as a Christian and a libertarian doesn't make sense. Why would you take two guys who are committing sodomy and punish them by throwing them in a prison where they will be sodomized? Well, then a few years later, the Supreme Court said, no, that would take it back. That's a bad law. Well, that might be a good result because I didn't agree with the law in the first place. I believe in legalizing everything as a libertarian, but now it's the federal government, which I don't believe has any authority under the Constitution to make that decision for in this case, Texas, in the Lawrence v. Texas case. So when it comes to businesses and running a business, again, my position is people should be free. It's not right for the government to come in and threaten you with fines or prison or firing squad, whatever it comes to. I mean, if you resist, the government will continue to escalate the violence until you're toast. So I'm against government regulating conduct in business. And we had a problem with Rand Paul, who was accused of being against the Civil Rights Act and saying that a business should be able to turn down a black for at the lunch counter. Well, I think that's totally stupid for anybody to turn away a customer based on the amount of melanin in their skin. And I can agree or disagree with an employer or a business who decides to turn away customers. But what we've got recently in the last year or so is businesses who are being shut down by the government. Their life's work that they put into this business because the government says you have to put a certain thing on your wedding cake. You have to create a journalistic approach. No.
Well, are you gentlemen tired now?
I'm taking the next question.
Let's see, did we get your answer and your answer? Yeah.
Right.
So we do have one last question, and that is, if elected, will you appear at the next forum?
That's an easy one.
Yeah, that's an easy one. I'm in this business to be at forums, and sometimes I forget what I was going to say, but I'm here to bring the message of everyone dwelling safely under his own vine and fig tree and not initiation of force to accomplish your goals. So I'll be...
We appreciate the time and effort that was put into this forum by our candidates, and I'm sure that I can speak for them by saying they'll be glad to hang around for a little while and answer any questions that any of you have.
Can I answer that last question?
Yes.
I didn't answer that question.
Okay. Can I assume? No, never assume.
I think that's important. And, Mr. Craig said something a while ago that I was a little taken aback by. I do not take money from special interest groups. My special interest group is you, the people. And that's the only place that I'm raising funds is from the people that support me. And we talked about lobbyists earlier. My lobbyist is you. So when I get to Washington, that's the people that I expect, the lobbyists that I want to hear from is the people that are here.
So we can expect you to appear at the next forum?
So, absolutely, I will appear at the next forum.
Thank you. The League of Women Voters also implores that the audience support your candidate, keep an open dialogue going with them and interest in the process, even if your candidate does not win. But be an informed voter. That's one of the special issues that League of Women Voters tries to support. I would invite you to visit with your candidates and also to pick up literature that is at the desk up at the top of the stairs. And if the stairs are not convenient for you, if you go out here, you'll find an elevator just under the other stairway so that you can get up to that level. We have information about joining the League of Women Voters. We'd love to have all of you, men and women, to join League. And also, students, please get involved in your community and please stay informed. Our next forum is a week from tonight, and that will be for the candidates who are running for county clerk. Mr. Struckhoff, who has been county clerk here in Greene County for 27 years, is retiring. And so we will have two candidates at that forum, two candidates at that forum, and we invite you to attend. That one will be at the Alumni Center downtown. Thank you. Be safe going home.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.